Hey, welcome to another day at Bio 100. I hope everything's going well for you guys and you're able to keep up with the course. Um, for those of you guys kind of trying to keep up with the suggested pace, you probably should have taken or be ready or getting ready to take exam 1 through Proctero. I know some students have already taken it and had good success, so please go ahead and figure it out. I've had one student mention to me that wasn't able to find the exam on Learning Suite. I'm not sure if that's just a Learning Suite issue for that one student. We all know at this point that Learning Suite likes to mess around with us quite a bit. But I would just suggest that if you can't find it, get in touch with your TAs. Make sure that that you're looking around in all the right places, because I know that it's working for some students. And if it's not working for you and you cannot find it, then we definitely need to try and get that resolved with some computer support here on campus. So let's go ahead and jump into our lecture today. I just want to talk about how chromosomes, DNA, and genes are related. Some of you may have been a little bit confused with our last lecture about chromosomes and sister chromatids and homologous pairs and all that kind of stuff. So here's what we'll kind of talk about. So homologous chromosomes, right? These are chromosomes that pair up during meiosis. So this is one came from each parent, so one from mom, one from dad. They contain the same genes. The chromosomes can contain the same genes, even though one's from dad and one's from mom. And it'll make more sense as we get into the actual genetics here. So each of these chromosomes is one long molecule. A gene is just a short region of that molecule, right? And that each chromosome may have more than 1,000 genes on it. And these genes all have different copies. And these different copies are called alleles. So that's what I kind of stumbled over a second ago, because I almost brought that up already, is that you have these different pairs, right? One from mom and one from dad, and they have the exact same genes, but those genes can have different alleles. And those different alleles are essentially what make up the variation you see. So mom and dad are going to have the exact same chromosome, and that chromosome is going to have the exact same gene for eye color. But mom and dad can have different alleles, an allele for blue eye color or an allele for brown eye color, right, as an example. Okay, so here is your pair of homologous chromosomes, right? One from mom, one from dad, just sticking with the current color stereotypes. Here you've got the same gene, but this gene is an allele for white color, right? In this case, I guess we'll talk about plants. We'll say this is going to be an allele for white flower color. This is going to be an allele for purple flower color, right? Same gene, but the alleles have different results. Okay, so we'll just move that over there. Now we can kind of go through this more. So here's the paternal homolog right here, the maternal homolog here. You can see the different, so the same gene, but in this case, these individuals share the same allele. Again, same gene, same allele, right, all the way down in these examples, okay? So the one thing that I'll focus on here is that here's the same gene, but different alleles, right? You have an individual that's going to have a large C and an individual with a small c. Okay, we also talked about autosomes and sex chromosomes. Remember, there's 22 pairs of autosomes, and there is just one group of sex chromosomes. If they are both identical, then it's going to be a female, at least in humans. And if they're not identical, meaning that there's an X and a Y, they're going to be male. Now the Y gene has just a few genes, not very many genes at all. And here's a schematic of it if you want to run down what those genes actually do. So we have the male gene actually has what we call the testes determining factor, gadgetry, channel flipping. These are all genes that are on the Y chromosome, right? We're all familiar with these, and we're totally kidding, just in case you haven't caught on. But in reality, the Y gene looks something like this, okay? The Y chromosome, excuse me. It's reduced in size compared to the X chromosome, and this actually sets up some really unique what we call sex-linked traits, which we'll get into later on. And the reason that they're sex-linked has to do with the fact that the Y chromosome in males doesn't carry all of these gene complements. Okay, so leaving sex chromosomes and coming to autosomes and looking at chromosome 1, we can see that it's 246 million base pairs long. And this is just a smattering of the genes that are covered there, but you can see all throughout there are genes that sit on this chromosome that help our bodies function properly, help us, some of us have blonde hair, some of us have brown hair, blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes. All of that is covered by the genes on these chromosomes. And so here's chromosome 1 with all of its genes, and then we can go all the way to chromosome 22 with all sorts of genes that are there, right? And so if you're looking here, here's gene 1, here's chromosome chromosome 2 with 243 million base pairs, and you can kind of bounce around and see how large these chromosomes are. Chromosome 22 is actually not very large, right? It's 49 million base pairs, 21's even a little smaller, 46 million base pairs. Nonetheless, they all are carrying genetic material. And everyone in our class has two copies of these 22, two homologous copies of these 22 autosomes. And then again, here's the Y and here's the X. So here's some essential terms as we start to talk about genetics in our class, and this is going to get really fun, so hang in there with me. Okay, we're just laying the foundation this lecture, but it'll get a lot of fun as we move on. So you have diploid individuals, which we started to talk about last time. These are two copies of each chromosome. Okay, these are in the somatic cells. Homologous pair, you have one from mom, one from dad. Haploid cells, there's only one copy of each chromosome. These are the reproductive cells, and they're done by what process? How are they duplicated? Kind of think about that. Do you remember? Meiosis, right? And these are homologous pairs that are just split down until they become haploid. So phenotype, this is the expression of a genetic trait. This is essentially what you see, and the genotype is the genetic makeup. So it's the actual genes on a chromosome, and sometimes it can be different than the phenotype. Like, we'll get into that. So mutation, which is just a change in DNA, right? And you're changing the DNA that's part of a gene. So these mutations can either be harmful. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of these are harmful. And then after that, you have others that are neutral. So the vast majority are either harmful or totally neutral. There are a select few that are actually beneficial. So different alleles that we see in our bodies have all come about through mutation. So everyone at one point in time had brown eyes until blue eyes arose through mutation, as an example, right? This isn't a real example, we just made this up, okay? So keep that in mind. So alleles in an individual. If an individual has the same two alleles at the gene, then they're going to be homozygous. If there's two different alleles, so this one is a big A, little a, then they're going to be heterozygous. And if they're and this is the genotype for these individuals, right? And then the phenotype, again, is the observable characters, okay, that make up this cute little guy. Okay, so what I want you to do is hit the pause button in a second and answer my question here. So with this new vocabulary that you have, I want you to look here and first figure out what's the eye color of this individual going to be. If you know that already, you can take a guess. If not, hang in there, it's okay. But I want you to really describe whether these individuals are homozygous or heterozygous for their trait. So just hit the pause button, see if you can use homozygous and heterozygous properly. Okay, hopefully you're back. So this individual here would be called heterozygous, and we'll get to this in a minute, but this individual would also have brown eyes because brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes, right? This individual is homozygous, but we would call this individual homozygous dominant because it has two dominant copies. And this individual would be homozygous, as you probably are guessing by now, recessive, okay? So Gregor Mendel was the father of genetics. He was this Gregorian monk, and he was able to go in and do a whole bunch of really cool, intricate experiments to demonstrate how things were inherited and which traits were dominant over other traits. Now, he published his work in 1866, but it wasn't even really discovered until the 1900s. And this is well after Darwin had published his ideas about evolution, and others had started to look at how traits were inherited. No one knew how they were inherited or kind of how genetics worked. They just knew that things were inherited. And Gregor Mendel had it somewhat figured out in 1866, but it took nearly 40 years for his work to be discovered and accepted. So here's what Gregor did. He would mate two individuals, right? So he used plants for these. And you have what's called the parental generation, okay? So he would mate purple individuals with white individuals, and then in the first generation, he would get all purple individuals, and then he would breed these individuals with each other, and the second generation, he would get white again, right? And this has to do with the genotype that you're seeing. And this is really fascinating, and it's really cool work. And looking at it, individuals that are homozygous, right, which is what he had originally bred here, and individuals that are homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, when you're looking at it, homozygous dominant individuals are purple, heterozygous individuals are also purple because they have the dominant allele, and then recessive individuals are always going to be white. Okay, so here's what Mendel did to break it down one more time, just a quick review. So he started with what we call true breeding plants. So these are plants that no matter what he did, every time he planted their offspring, they were always purple. And he started with individuals that were always white. And then he did the F1 generation cross, right? So he crossed these individuals. What does the F1 generation look like if you have true breeding individuals, but one's dominant over the other? Hopefully you're able to make sense of this. When you have one dominant over the other, the first generation is always going to be purple, right? Because that dominant trait's going to rule out. But then in the F2 generation, you should see individuals from the original population coming out, right? That they should be around. And so the question is, why does this happen, right? Why doesn't it always just stay purple if it's dominant, no matter if you're heterozygous or dominant purple? Well, we can actually work this out in a Punnett square. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to do these crosses on your own. I realize this might stretch some of you a little bit, okay? But you've probably done Punnett squares before. So you're going to take one parent over here, and you're going to put its alleles, right, which would be capital P and capital P. You're going to do that, and then capital P and capital P, and then the lowercase p and lowercase p here, right? And you're going to do those crosses, and then you're going to cross parent, then you're going to cross parent 1 with parent 2. And so you should put the big P here, little p here, little p here, do the cross, and then what should you find in this population? Should anyone, according to your genetics, be white or purple? What's the ratio? And then what you're going to do is you're going to cross these individuals here in the F2 generation, and you should be able to see pretty quickly how this all sorts out and why you would get the ratio here of essentially 3/4 being purple and 1/4 being white. And that's because all these individuals should be heterozygous, right? So you would come over here, so you'd put big P, little p, little p, and then as you cross those out, you'll find that all these individuals are going to have a purple genotype, and this individual here is going to be homozygous, recessive, or white. Okay, so here's a summary of Mendel's concepts. You have these alternative versions of genes. These are called alleles, and they cause variation in inherited traits. Offspring inherit one allele from each parent. An allele is dominant if it has exclusive control, meaning that if it's there and it's present, whatever that trait is going to be shown. So in our P example that we were just looking at, purple is dominant because whether it's homozygous or heterozygous, the plant is purple. So it has exclusive control over what we call the phenotype. And then there's two copies of a gene These get separated in meiosis and they end up in different gametes, right? We've done this before. The gametes are going to fuse at fertilization without regard to which allele they carry. They just come together. It's just the way it goes. So there are more alleles that also follow this pattern, okay? So there are different versions of given genes. So some of you guys can probably think about your blood type. There are 3 alleles on one gene that control blood type. So this is why you're going to be you're going to be A, B, AB, or essentially O, okay? If you're neither A or B. And so why would we have these 4 combinations? This is the question that you want to ask yourself, right? If you have these 3 alleles, A, B, or O, what 4 combinations can you have? And if you think about it, as we talked about already, right, you can have A individuals, B individuals, AB individuals, or type O individuals. And if you're thinking about kind of what we've talked about already, the Punnett square, how these all work, the variation in alleles, it makes sense that you can have these 4 different blood types. So here's an activity that'll kind of help drive this home. In humans, right, and after we're done reading this, I really want you to take a second, hit the pause button, and work this through. Make sure you understand it, okay? So in humans, brown eyes, big B, are dominant over smaller case b, right? Ryan, a brown-eyed man, marries Katie, a blue-eyed woman, and they have 12 children. Draw the Punnett square that illustrates this marriage, okay? And then what types of possible phenotypes or genotypes of the children, right? What are the possible phenotypes and genotypes of the children? Okay? And what do you predict will be the ratio of each? Now, you should be able to look at this and sort it out. There's clues hidden here that will help you understand what are the genotypes of both Katie and Ryan. Okay, so if blue is recessive, what must be the woman's genotype? Okay, if that's her genotype, what kind of gametes can she produce? If the man has brown eyes but has a blue-eyed child, right? Here's the clue. What must his genotype be? If that's his genotype, what kind of gametes can he produce? Does this all make sense now? You're starting to see that a little more clearly? And I think we'll just hang here just a little bit. This is really clear in the classroom together, but I just want to make sure everyone's up to speed. So she must be B, lowercase b and lowercase b, right? So she can only produce eggs for blue eyes. But Ryan here, because we know that he produced a blue-eyed child and we know that brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes, means that Ryan must be heterozygous, meaning he has a big B and a small b in terms of eye genotype. So he's actually able to produce gametes for both blue and brown eyes, and that's how you get a blue-eyed child. Okay, so if we were together, this would be super duper fun. This is always a big part of our class where we get to laugh and work things out together. But what I want you to do is pick 3 traits from this list, and I want you to figure out what is your phenotype, what are the phenotypes of your parents and your siblings. And you should be able to do this, right? What are your parents' genotypes for these traits, and what is your genotype for these traits? And what are the genotypes of your siblings? So, for example, like in the previous example, right, if we just go with something easy and pick eye color, you can figure out what your parents' eye colors are, what their phenotype is, and from their phenotype and looking at the phenotypes of your siblings, you should be able to piece together whose genotype is what, just like we did in the previous example, right? That we knew Ryan was, even though he was brown-eyed, he produced a blue-eyed child, so that means that Ryan has to be heterozygous for brown eyes. Okay, and the other thing that I'll do is as you work through these, I'm just going to really carefully state some stuff here. So some students go through this and they just absolutely freak out, right? Because they're like, both my parents have brown eyes and I have blue eyes. How can that possibly work, right? Well, it turns out that probably both your parents are heterozygous, so chill out. It's okay. No, no infidelity there. Your parents are great. Marriage is solid. That just happens. Also, there are other moments where students are like, well, what about green eyes? I've got, green, and it's really, it's like this big problem, and how does that fit into my genetics? Don't worry. So you can imagine that what we're presenting here is very simplified. So green eyes are actually just a lesser coloration of brown eyes. But as you can imagine, just like skin color in humans that's extremely variable, eye color isn't controlled explicitly by being either dominant or recessive, because we all know that individuals around us have different eye colors. And so although there's the hard fast rule that at the base there will either be brown or blue eyes, there's a lot of variation in that color. And sometimes blue eyes, which is a recessive trait, just by adding a few other genes that regulate the color of eyes, can make them look a little more green than they are. And sometimes brown eyes with a little bit of other genetics around it can also be made to look green too. So it's not as cut and dry as you think, but there are some really cool traits here that you should definitely explore. And just in the last minute, I'm actually going to share a funny story. I had one student in my class who was red hair, blue eyes, and I was walking up and down the aisle, and he pulled me over, and he was like, Dr. Bybee, my family, my parents both have brown hair and brown eyes, and all of my siblings do too. How do I fit in my family? And he was super distraught. And I was like, dude, I don't know. I'm not going to touch this one. As nicely as I could. In my mind, I'm thinking, wow, I just need to comfort this guy and move on. Like, I can't get involved in this. And he was really distraught. Like, I could just feel it. And I was like, look, I'm sure it works out. I'm sure it's okay. I'm sure there's an explanation. So anyway, I'm walking around helping other students in the class. And like 2 or 3 minutes later, he waves me over. He's like, Dr. Bybee, come over. And he's like, dude, I totally forgot. I'm adopted. So I just died laughing on the spot. He was laughing. He was so embarrassed. And it's like, I just thought, wow, those parents, they did a fantastic job with that kiddo, never making him feel in any way, shape, or form that he was adopted or an outsider in the family, even though he clearly did not have the phenotype or genotype to match the rest of his family. Anyway, I hope you guys have fun with this exercise. Be sure to pick those 3 traits, work them through, figure out by looking at the phenotype of your family, your parents, and your siblings. You should also be able to sort that out for those around, for yourself. You should also be able to sort out the genotypes of yourself, your parents, and your siblings as well. Okay, next time we're going to do a little experiment where we're going to work with Mars and Marsa, 2 Martians, and we're going to actually do some crosses and try and figure out some pretty high-level genetics in the next course. And I hope you guys will have a lot of fun with it. So stay safe, be careful out there, and we will definitely talk.